Okay, so what the format of this session is that we ask questions one at a time. We have 7 questions to ask. We see what your results are. We see what the panel's reflections are. You can ask a couple of questions if you like and comment on the results. And then we'll move on to the next question. The first question is what's known in polling circles as a gimme. If you don't get this one right, we're slightly worried. If anyone doesn't know the answer to that, it becomes a mini mental state examination. Basically, we want to know who you are. Who's coming to the NICE conference? What area of health and social care do you work in? NHS, public health, social care, local government, industry, farm, industry, medtech, and diagnostics. Doesn't seem to be a patient choice on there, does there? No. Shouldn't have pointed that out. So I don't know. I guess if you're patient, you're NHS, are you? No. How many people have private health insurance? Put your hand up. Just check, it's all right. Okay, well, I don't know what to do about the patients. I think that's a bit of a miss, isn't it? Is there a 7 on there? Can we have 7? If you're a patient, press 7. I know we're all patients, and I don't want to go down that, so don't get like that. But if you're primarily here in your role as a patient, press 7. Okay, would you like to vote now for us? Anyone watch Countdown? It's a good program. Okay, so let's just see. Oh. So can that take away from 100 and see how many patients are here? 55, 12, 2, 1, or 6. Okay. So most people, quite a few people here from industry this year. And public health. Does that surprise you, Andrew?
The numbers coming from industry?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. I mean, through the years, it's always been an important event for the industry to engage with others who've got an interest in what NICE does, so it's good to see them here. We'd love to see more people, particularly from social care and local government, at the conference because of all the things that we're going to be doing that will support the sort of activities that they're going to be responsible for.
You would imagine that would improve,
increase
next year, wouldn't it?
Yeah, we'll need to make an effort to make sure the conference is
because when did you move into public health? About 5 years ago, wasn't it? 10 years ago? 5 years ago? 5 years ago, and you've now got 12% public health, so you would expect social care and local government to grow at the same level. Yeah. And how many people, just a quick show of hands, how many people here are primarily here as patients? Because you're clearly the most important, which is why we need you from the list. Put your hand up straight and high so we can see. Excellent. So a fair smattering of patients. I think that's important to keep growing that as well, because that's a really vital contribution. Okay, so let's move on to either of the others you want to comment on that. Are you?
I mean, the only thing I'd say about the social care is just to, in terms of promoting it, just to remember what a really large and very diverse sector it is. And therefore the need to absolutely make sure that the conference speaks to the sector's concerns in the future, and that hopefully will bring people in.
Okay. Stephen, are all the people here from industry people you brought with you? All your mates? Do you bus them in for support?
My delegation, yeah, often because I feel lonely and isolated. Okay. But no, I think it's a fair reflection from industry. We work very closely with NICE, obviously. I'm surprised there's not more from social care.
Okay.
Comment.
Okay, well, hopefully that's something we can grow. Okay, let's move on to our first question proper there. Has the government got the balance between nudging and regulation in its approach to promoting good public health? Have they got the balance right? Have they got it about right? Too much in favour of a nudge, or too much in favour of regulation? Has the government got the balance between nudging and regulation in approach to promoting good public health? Okay, we have 15 seconds to vote, starting from now. Ooh, look at that. I just want to see why this woman's clapping so vociferously there. Can we just give this woman a microphone? We've never had that before. You fed up with nudging? Where's the microphone? Do we have some microphones here? No, can we have one over here for this woman here? Tell us why you clapped so spontaneously.
I'm from public health, and nudging doesn't work nearly as well. The evidence in favour of regulation is so strong. Nudging doesn't work nearly as well as regulation. So we need a nanny state. I'm really sorry. We need more of a nanny state.
Ooh. Whoa. I think you're right. Minimum prices for alcohol and all that jazz. What do you make of that, Andrew?
Well, we do need a balance. I think it's interesting. I suspected when I saw the question that that would be pretty much the response that we get. Of course, this government is very keen through the sorts of responsibility networks approach and the other actions that it's taking to encourage us all as individuals to think about what our responsibility is to our own health. And I think that's absolutely right. In the end, if we don't, in some respects, short of legislation that puts us in jail, there's a limitation on the extent to which we can be compelled to do something. It can be taken away, and in certain circumstances from us, so the temptation is removed, perhaps in terms of the content of the food that we eat, the units of alcohol, as we were hearing yesterday, and the things that we drink. But I do believe, actually, we have an individual responsibility to think about our health and to do the things that only we as individuals can do. So it is a balance, and it depends on what it is. Regulation works in certain circumstances, but I think in other circumstances, the government is probably right in addressing a balance that maybe had got out of balance under the previous administration in terms of what we were being required and compelled and cajoled to do, as opposed to putting in front of us the facts, the reality of the consequences of the choices that we make, and letting and in effect making us take the decisions, which I think is important.
What do you make of that, Amanda? Do you think people are amenable to nudging, or do you think actually we need more legislation in terms of public health?
In terms of public health, I mean, I'd make 2 points which actually come from the experience of social care, really. One is to sort of pick up Andrew's point about the importance of, in your case, individuals, but I think what we've found is that it's very important that providers of social care take responsibility for the quality of service that they provide. So getting the balance between regulation and, say, the sort of work that Sky does, which is provide tools to help people improve their services, is quite right. The other lesson, which I think is quite interesting, comes from the children's services side, and from the work that Eileen Munro's done, looking at children's services, and really the analysis that she provided, which showed that if you prescribe too much, and this was in terms of professional behaviour, you get a lot of unintended consequence in terms of restricting people's abilities to make judgments about what they think should be the right thing to do. So I think it's a really tricky balance, but we've got some interesting lessons from, different parts and different sectors to help us with that.
Okay. Stephen, do you have any?
Yeah, I think useful analogy here. I spent 4 or 5 years of my life as Group Alcohol Policy Director for the world's largest alcohol company. And exactly. And and part of my brief was to maintain and protect advertising and marketing freedoms by promoting responsible and encouraging responsible drinking. It took me one night when my sister, who was on A&E in Airedale, she said, "I want you to come one night and spend it with me on Friday night at A&E." And I changed my opinion completely on what alcohol policy should be, because the social costs of excessive alcohol consumption are quite extreme. And I do believe in minimum pricing. I do believe in strict controls on advertising. I do believe that alcohol companies and alcohol should bear the social costs of the problem. And I think that's an area where you do need strict regulation. And I also think it comes back down to what Andrew said about personal responsibility as well. That plays a part. But I do agree with the public health lady that we want more regulation in certain areas that are critical. Personal responsibility thing's funny, because I was reading something the other day about, there's a website called Shot It, which is very, very funny. And it had this thing about wine, how posh people get wasted. And it is a reality that we all don't stick to our 2 units. For a woman, 2 units a day, and if a man, 3 units a day. We often don't stick to that. And we should recognise and acknowledge that. But we should also acknowledge that we are building up a huge epidemic on alcohol abuse in terms of liver disease, particularly in young people, and it's related to all sorts of social misbehaviour. And on tobacco, I'm also a big believer in blank packaging, behind the counter, unhidden. And I say that as an occasional smoker, which is, basically, there has to be, I think, the strong arm of the law in all of this. And we're often behind a lot of other countries. Australia's already there. Sweden controls its alcohol distribution quite carefully. Alcohol advertising is banned in France. These people have very different relationships to alcohol than the British do. So I am, having gone around the circles in this, I'm in favour of regulation on public health grounds.
Okay, anyone in the audience want to... You seem to have covered most of the bases. Anyone else want to come back with any point? Okay, well, I keep apparently avoiding people up on this hand side, but I can't see anyone with their hands up. Okay, oh no, we've got one here. Number 1, what do you want to say?
Hi there.
Tell us who you are.
Francesco Palma.
And
I'm
how much
kind of
you drink?
thinking all the good work you guys are doing, but as we move towards, if it's rolled out beyond the pilot stage, personal health budget, user services, with long-term condition, whatever, that they will say their own narrative and define what will enable them to live those quality of life measures. So in some ways, you can have all the outcome frameworks, everything else, but it may not necessarily fit in how people perceive their own perception of what will work for them. And there's no evidence other than their own narrative of how it would be for them, and they've not researched nothing. So you put aside things like you can't use it for gambling, paying off debt, tobacco, alcohol, and all the other bit, but the rest of it, anything goes, probably.
Okay. I think actually of all the things Labour did, it was the banning of smoking in public places.
Yeah.
Probably had the hugest health impact, I
Yes,
think.
enormous.
And the only... I was in a pub in Cardigan. I was on tour in Cardigan recently. I met my first person called Mifanwi, which was rather nice, and she took me out to a pub afterwards, and someone did a really bad fart, and she said the worst thing about the public smoking ban is now you can smell when people did a really bad... That's about the only side effect, but you come back nothing... And I think those issues, when we know that things are so detrimental, I think there is a bigger role for nanny state. So nanny state and proud of it is what we should be telling Andrew Lansley, whoever's lucky enough to interview him later. Okay. Question 2. Which of these will be the biggest health and social care resource challenge in the next 5 years? You're not allowed to say all of the above. So obesity, diabetes, cancer, or alcohol-related illness. You have 15 seconds to vote, starting now. Fairly overwhelmingly obesity. Okay, panel thoughts? Andrew?
Well, no big surprise, because of course obesity is associated with so many other conditions that it is, if we can tackle that, if we can do something to reduce the amplitude of the wave of obesity that's in the process of crashing over us, we're not going to stop it. But reducing it somewhat will actually have a very substantial effect, both in the short term, particularly in the long term, on the things that people are going to have to live with and the burdens associated with that for the health and social care system. So again, I think the audience has got that absolutely right. Nice done a lot. Put a lot of tools in the hands of those in local government and in the NHS to help both sectors do something to tackle the challenge that's facing all of us with obesity. There's more that we can do on doing it, but as I say, I think the audience has got that right.
Okay. Presumably obesity makes social care even harder, doesn't it?
Yes. I wouldn't disagree with the audience on that rating at all. I guess I was slightly surprised not to see a condition like dementia up there, because I think in terms of both the challenge, we've seen an 11% rise in people aged over 84 since about 2004. And, that's the age where your risk of getting dementia increases hugely. And I think in terms of just the challenge it places on both services and the impact on families. Often carers who are older people themselves is enormous. So if you look at the resource challenge in terms of family resource, social care resources and healthcare resources, you know, dementia would be a really big one for me. And although both NICE and Sky have done a lot of work, and we've had the dementia strategy, we're still, you know, there's still an awful lot to do. So, as I say, my vote, especially over the next 5 years, would be for dementia.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's a very good point. Stephen, anything else you'd like to see on
I'd
that?
echo what Amanda said. I was
Yeah.
astonished it wasn't up there, because in terms of resource allocation, that's going to absorb a huge amount. On the obesity thing, no surprise, but I do think there needs to be some hypothecated taxation put in place on fat foods, which Denmark are doing, which is, sorry, it was on the radio this morning about cans of Fanta and Coca-Cola, and they have six teaspoons of sugar in each one. They're causing enormous damage. We're drinking these things that used to be treats now, continually, particularly kids. And I do think there needs to be some hypothecation there between the cause and the effect, so that we can actually invest some more money in this. There has to be found new sources to deal with it.
Excellent. Any comments from the audience? Yes, this gentleman here.
Meijnerd Boysen from NICE. Just wondered, the magic bullet in terms of pharmaceuticals seems to be on number 3. So all of the development in pharmaceutical industry is all focused around 3. There's very little coming in terms of medicines that really make a difference in obesity, and actually also quite a little in dementia. So real changes. Can you comment on
Yes,
that?
I'll happily comment on that. There are at the moment 165 trials in place, 165 different products for dementia stroke Alzheimer's, and I think there's about 6 in phase 3. So your comment there wasn't accurate. There is a lot of trial work going on in cancer, and very obviously a lot of the, and what's happening there is more and more moving towards the rarer cancers, the smaller patient populations. On diabetes, clearly we have a range of pharmaceutical products available. In diabetes care, only 7% of the overall cost of a patient is the medicine. So what you have there is you have pretty cheap, effective medicines that help as a manageable disease. On obesity, we've struggled with this one, we're frank. We do have clinical trials ongoing. From my last reading of the data, about 30. So we are looking at it. Surgery seems to be one of the better options at the moment. Seems to be the most cost-effective. A lot of the medicines that have come through have had limited, to be honest, limited impact. I think there's one on the market now that is used very readily, which is Xenical, which prevents the fat being absorbed. I think one of the issues there is, of course, that the patient has to control the fat intake. So it's part behavioural, part pharmaceutical. But I would challenge you on the Alzheimer's thing, because we're doing a lot of research on that.
NICE has done guidance on bariatric surgery, hasn't it?
On
bariatric surgery.
Yes, it has.
Surgery
yes.
for extreme weight loss. I was actually at a conference of bariatric surgeons, and their results, if they are true, are quite extraordinary in terms of weight loss, reversing diabetes, hypertension, arthritis, sleep apnea, and lifestyle stuff. But despite the NICE guidance, huge variation in access to bariatric surgery. But clearly it's a long-term psychological thing. There was a really interesting point yesterday from someone who said, when you see obesity, you should see pain in patients. And if the biggest pleasure in their life is to eat, you give them the bariatric surgery, then you don't have the long-term psychological issue of how you replace the pleasure of eating with something else. Yes, number 1.
Thank you. Catherine Abel from Manchester. I just wanted to say, I don't think dementia, I mean, of course it comes under the auspices of mental health, but I think depression and other chronic mental disorders, less common than depression, should also be on the list, particularly in terms of the social care burden, but also in terms of the cost burden for people. So I'm surprised not to see that.
So NICE has missed off mental health altogether, hasn't it?
Extraordinary. Well, dementia, of
Shocking.
course, yes, exactly.
I'm shocked, frankly. Quickly, number 2, and then we must move on. I won't get through our questions. Very quick point.
Just to really carry on the same topic, I suspect the reason dementia wasn't on the list, along with other age-associated problems, because there is a perception that these areas of care are clinically inappropriate. Therefore, we can't have a major effect, whereas actually the contrary is the case. When we get good health care and good social care together, the achievements both in terms of effectiveness and cost effectiveness are salutary and very consistent, and it is just such a massive challenge.
But it's crucial we have integration of health and social care to do that, is what you're saying, which is what we're all aiming towards. So actually, very fair point.
Actually, the real reason it's not on there is that when I gave these questions a quick once over, noticed.
Okay.
So I ought to be completely open about that. I mean, it clearly should have been, and an interesting point that would have arisen from it is where the burden of care, in effect, the kind of resources are going to come from in order to support those who are living with dementia and other mental health conditions. And of course, the NHS and the formal social care, the NHS has a part to play. That social care is a huge part to play, but an enormous proportion of the care and the resource that needs to go into supporting people living with mental health conditions will come from families. It's an obvious point to make, but it's an important point to make because, in effect, that question was really about the burden on the health system rather than more broadly the burden on the community as a whole.
Okay, let's move on to our fourth question. What's the biggest barrier to better integration between health and social care? Is it differing organisational cultures, time and resource issues on the ground, lack of clear leadership at a national level, lack of leadership at a local level, or not knowing how to do it? You have to choose one of those, and your time to vote starts now. Oh, so differing organised. Well, a fair spread of results there. I think we'll come to you, Amanda. Look at that spread of results. Do you see that as how you would perceive the barriers to integration?
Yes, I think, yeah, they're interesting. I would go for the differing organisational cultures as being, we've just published, and those of you, we've been doing a brisk trade at Upstand, but those of you who haven't been there, we've just published a research briefing on integration. And interestingly, one of the points it makes is that these are, both sides of the same coin. So actually, it's great that organisational cultures and professional perspectives are different, because actually, that's the whole point. You know, you get different views on people's problems, and that's potentially very creative. But also, if you don't learn enough about each other's language and ways of doing things, this can be a tremendous barrier as well. So I think that's one of the most significant things. The other one I'd like to comment on actually is the not knowing how to do it. I think it's very interesting. I've always thought, having worked nationally for a while, that actually locally a lot of people do know how to do this, and there are a lot of really good examples of people working well together to provide well-coordinated services for people in an integrated way. I do think one of the things that's always struck me, though, is that it is something that we assume comes naturally to people as part of their professional way of being and doing things, and actually it doesn't. And it is one of the reasons it doesn't always happen is because it is really quite difficult to do. And we do need to think about how we fit and train people across health and social care to work in this more coordinated way. And the other thing we need to remember, and it wasn't actually in your list, which is very good, is it's not a question of reorganising the deck chairs. It's not a question of structure. It is a question of those other sorts of things and the attention that you pay to the relationships. Actually, on the time front, to just making sure that you've given people enough time to work in the way that you think they need to be working to make this happen.
Andrew, as NICE has moved into social care, have you noticed any cultural differences to working in clinical care, or actually have people accepted the model just as readily?
Well, I've got a point on that. It's interesting that it was number one. I would have voted for number 5, but that might say more about me than it does the audience here and those on the ground who are having to make these connections so that those of us who are moving between health and social care are not seen as two completely different people. when we cross these organisational boundaries. Well, just to go back to the point you've made, it's been very interesting over the last year as I and others at NICE have started a journey really to understand more about social care as it is at the moment, what its challenges are, and to get some sense of the reaction of social care to the idea of NICE producing any kind of advice or quality standards in the system. And when I went along to talk to national leaders of those who provide care, residential and domiciliary care, those who are commissioning care, I had 2 points to make. The first of which was just to anticipate your question about why an organisation that's probably more immediately associated with advising the NHS on drugs and anything to do with social care is talking to you about making a contribution to what you do. And the second point was about wanting to listen and learn. The response to that first question was really interesting. In every case, it was not absolutely, so why on earth are you here talking to me about doing something in social care? It was, well, providing you do understand the language and the culture and the dynamics in the system, providing you pick the right topics and provide advice on things that matter to us, we'd love to have you producing quality standards and guidance for social care because of your reputation for doing it in the NHS. So it's not the fact that you're good at looking at new drugs or other aspects of clinical care. It's the fact that you've got a reputation for objectivity and independence and credibility in what you've been producing. So it's very positive and good, I think, good omen really for the contribution that we're going to make.
Okay, excellent. We've got a few more questions we've got to get through before the break, so I'm going to move on to our next question. Are the rewards for pharmaceutical companies sufficient enough to compensate for the financial risks they take in getting a drug to market? Is that one of your questions, Stephen? Okay, you have a choice between yes, no, or don't know. We've kept it very simple for you. You have 15 seconds, starting from now. And the results. Ooh. So yes, everyone's doing swimmingly well, Stephen. Would you like to comment on that? Do you think that's a fair answer?
I think it's an interesting reflection. I think the basic economics are probably well known to people, which is it does take between 10 to 15 years to get a medicine to market. 1 in 10,000 molecules that's identified finally gets it to a patient, and that cost has gone up enormously. It's now averaging about 1.3, 1.4 billion pounds to get a medicine to market, which is more than NASA took to launch the space shuttle. So, you know, those pills that you see might look sort of irrelevant, but the reality is they cost an awful lot of money to get there. The UK is just part of the world. I mean, it's not just about the UK. My main concern is the UK market, and our frustration in the UK, and it's something we share with NICE, is that the UK is typically a slow adopter of innovation. Now, if NICE approves something, I scratch my head and think, well, why isn't everyone adopting it? Why is that not mandated? Why is people not pursuing it? Because they've assessed the risks, they've assessed the benefits, they've proven it's cost effective, and for God's sake, use it. Why are we 33% behind the European average on new cancer meds, despite the Cancer Drugs Fund? All these questions come to mind. And we also know from an industrial perspective that the industry is going through a great deal of change. We have the biggest patent cliff ever. So the NHS alone stands to save £3.6 billion between 2011 and 2015 through big patent expiries like olanzapine, like Lipitor, various range of medicines coming off patent. So my fundamental view is that I think the reward. The other thing I would say, and again, people something called PAS, Patient Access Schemes, which is part of the process we go through in discussion with NICE and DH to get medicines to market. What that does, in actual fact, is they make some medicine available through other routes rather than just through the sales route. What that does, in effect, is slightly discount on the price. Now, PAS has been quite a successful program, but the fact that it is being used so often at the moment illustrates that from a price perspective, in the UK, we are dragging the floor in the European price bracket, which we are. We are the lowest price market in Europe. And that's, some people may celebrate that, but if you sit here like me thinking, well, we need to have that income to do the R&D for the next treatments, be it the Alzheimer's, be it intractable cancers, whatever, then it's not a cause for celebration. We need a fair reward for fair input and fair taking of risk, and only this industry takes that risk. I mean, 90% of medicines in the world were discovered by this industry, and that should be a cause for celebration, but it also is one that we need to have a reward for.
How would you have voted had you have voted there? What would you have said? Are the rewards for pharmaceutical companies sufficient enough to compensate for the financial risk? Would you have been a yes, a no, or a don't know?
Oh, I would have voted yes.
Okay.
Why? I'm interested that 26% of people don't know, and I think that's an illustration of the fact that there's a lot of confusion around just how much it does cost a pharmaceutical company to get a drug to market. All sorts of figures have been quoted in recent years. They're usually multiples of each other as the sum goes up. You know, it's a stratosphere in excess of $1 billion, pounds, euros, whatever currency it is that people are talking about. And the reality is, I just don't think we know. It would be interesting to know whether an individual drug company actually knows what it costs to take any particular molecule, that 1 in 10,000 that Stephen referred to, through the entire process and to market. What is the case is that it is very expensive. There's no doubt about it. And pharmaceutical companies, other elements of the healthcare industry, are perfectly entitled to seek the returns that enable them to cover the costs of development and critically to provide themselves with the seed corn to bring the next product that we're all looking for. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that at all. What I think it would be really good for the industry would be to just sort of open up. I mean, clearly an individual company can't open up all of its books because of the competitive issues around that, but for there to be some objective and independent assessment, which I'm not sure I've seen, of what it does actually cost. And perhaps even more importantly, for maybe a process of engagement between the industry and healthcare systems, and that is taking off, not least in this country, to look at the model for developing new drugs and for getting those new drugs to market, to see whether there are costs that we can take out of that process so that in the end, providing the price is an appropriate reflection of both the cost and the incremental value of a new drug, we can be confident we're paying the right price.
Okay, we've got another based question now, so let's quickly ask the next one. What proportion of NHS spend will be taken up by medicines expenditure in 5 years' time? What do we think? Vote now. 5, 10, 15, 20 or 25? So most of us say 20. What is it at the moment, Stephen?
9%.
So 9%. So you'd be quite happy with 20, would you?
It's gone down from 13%. I'd be very happy if it was 20%. Yeah, it's gone down from 13% to 9% during the course of the past 4 years.
Okay.
And our forecasts indicate it will probably remain between 9 and 10% until 2018. It's pretty stable.
Okay. Does anyone in the audience want to come back on those pharma-related? Psst. Oh, that was good. That was a very good way of getting my attention. Great. Oi, ginger would have worked, but psst is pretty good. I have some sort of...
Oi, ginger.
Yeah. Very good.
David Moores from Edmonton, Alberta. When the pharmaceutical industry tells us about the billions it costs to bring the drug to market, does that include the marketing costs as well? What percentage of the billions is actually really marketing?
Okay.
None. In R&D, none, because it's the cost calculated up until you get your license. So none. Marketing costs are clearly allocated and quite controlled, depending which market. And if you're in the US, marketing costs cost a lot more. But in a market like the UK, typically they're very low.
What component, Stephen, what components of the price that's charged for a drug in the US, for example, is actually a reflection of the amount of money that's spent on marketing the product?
I don't know, to be honest, Andrew. On the US market, I really don't know. I do know in the UK, under the current pricing regime, the PPRS, which, as you know, caps profits, we are given a marketing allowance. Now, marketing, the term marketing can often be derogatory because often what we're talking about is education. Because entertainment, for example, is very severely constrained. I mean, a rep, for example, such as those, and they are dying out, unfortunately, the reps are dying out, the whole model of relationships are changing. But they can take a doctor out and they can spend £17 on that doctor for dinner. Okay? They can't take a doctor's partner. If I take a doctor to a medical congress, it has to be 75% medical content, and they can only fly them economy. So the myths about the way things used to be was always in the Caribbean, you go and you do an hour medical and you spend 3 days on the golf course. That stuff just does not happen.
You get quite a lot at Nando's for £17 though, can't you? Okay, final question, because there are lunchtime sessions going on. We have to move on to our final voting question, which is, to what extent will social media and communications technology revolutionise the health system in the UK over the next 5 years? Totally, partly, not at all. Totally, the way patients and service users expect to receive information and communicate has changed. The health service needs to keep up. Partly, although it's bound to be a slow revolution, or not at all. Can you give us your final votes now, please? 5 years. Okay, so 51% say totally, 47% partly. Do you see that in social care too, Amanda? I mean, we talked about dementia and people. Do you think that these sort of aids are going to help people with social care problems and things, or are you slightly sceptical about the benefits?
Yes, I mean, I think I was reminded of this, some of the commentary that went on about the Arab Spring when I saw this question, and a point that was made that it is, of course, people who make revolutions, not Facebook. So we have to see this, I think, as, I mean, I think social media is a terrific catalyst and tool for change, and I think one of the ways in which it can help us in social care and indeed health professionals change is it helps people to gain access to information and then use it in a kind of informed conversation and dialogue with either their social care worker or their healthcare worker. And I think that's immensely powerful and a real catalyst to the kind of shift in relationship that we need. And that's as relevant in dementia, where you need to be having some really difficult conversations with carers or indeed with service users about their condition. And I think it also changes the way in which the public and people who use services relate to organisations and to their leaders too. So it has terrific potential, but a lot of that is about the way we make use of it, and also about being absolutely certain that people who have traditionally not had very good access to services don't continue to have poor access to services because they're excluded from this digital revolution.
So excellent. We're going to have to leave it there. We're about 5 minutes running over, so I think we should wind up. Big round of applause for our speakers. Thank you very much.